Somewhere right now, a brilliant person is sitting at their desk, unable to start. They have everything they need: the information, the skills, the time, the intelligence, and yet they are completely stuck. Not because they lack talent, not because the goal is impossible, but because something inside their own mind is quietly working against them. Maybe that person is you. Maybe you already know exactly what you should be doing. You can picture the outcome you want. You can see the steps clearly. And yet, something keeps pulling you back. Distraction creeps in. Self-doubt whispers at the wrong moment. The creeping exhaustion that comes from pushing hard without the right mental tools slowly accumulates, until even things that used to feel exciting now feel like effort. Here is what nobody tells you about high performance. The problem is almost never effort. Most intelligent, driven people already push themselves hard. They are not lazy. They are not unmotivated. The problem is that they are running an unoptimized mind. A mind operating on factory default settings. A mind that was never shown how to perform at its genuine best. What follows is the course that was never offered. A complete, practical, psychologically grounded journey through the mechanics of elite mental performance. Not a collection of motivational slogans. Not a list of habits to blindly copy. A real, honest exploration of how your mind works, why it sometimes works against you, and exactly what to do about it. In the next several hours, you are going to understand the architecture of your attention. You are going to learn why pressure destroys focus for some people and sharpens it for others, and how to land on the right side of that equation. You are going to see why recovery is not a reward for hard work, but the condition that makes hard work sustainable. You are going to understand the real source of confidence, the hidden cost of cognitive overload, the engineering of flow states, and the identity structures that either accelerate or silently sabotage everything you are trying to build. This is not inspiration. This is infrastructure. Stay with this. What comes next will change how you think, how you work, how you rest, and how you grow. Starting right now, we live in an age of extraordinary access. More information, more tools, more frameworks for success than any generation before us could have imagined. And yet the rates of burnout, anxiety, creative paralysis, and chronic underperformance have never been higher. Something is broken, and it is not the tools. It is the operator. Most people have never been taught how their mind actually works under pressure. They were never shown how attention operates as a biological resource, how cognitive load silently degrades decision-making, how the stories they tell about themselves become the actual ceiling on what they can achieve, or how the environment they inhabit shapes their behavior far more powerfully than willpower ever could. School taught you what to think. Almost nothing taught you how to think, or how to focus, or how to recover, or how to sustain performance across a long and meaningful life without breaking down. This book is the course that was never offered, and it is structured as a complete journey, not a collection of tips. We begin with attention because everything else depends on it. A mind that cannot focus cannot learn, cannot create, cannot solve the problems that matter most. From there, we move into pressure and how your interpretation of stress determines whether it helps or hurts your performance. We look at recovery because sustained excellence requires cycles, not just intensity. We explore failure through the lens of growth, identity through the lens of behavioral science, cognitive load through the lens of practical management, flow states through the lens of deliberate engineering. We examine confidence honestly, stripping away the myth of personality-based self-belief and replacing it with the far more useful framework of competence-based certainty. We look at the internal narrator, the running commentary inside your own head, and the very real skill of learning to direct it rather than be directed by it. We explore cognitive flexibility, the capacity to think in multiple frames simultaneously and update your beliefs when the evidence demands it. We examine the power of environmental design, the counterintuitive but well-supported finding that structuring your surroundings intelligently is more reliable than relying on willpower. And we close with the long game mentality, the orientation that transforms daily discipline from grind into genuine meaning. Every chapter is built around a real human struggle. Every chapter delivers a practical insight you can apply immediately. There is no filler here, no vague inspiration, just honest, grounded, psychologically informed knowledge in service of one goal, helping you become genuinely better at being you. That is the only kind of change that lasts. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Attention. Core Lesson. Your attention is not infinite. It is a biological resource that can be managed, depleted, and deliberately restored. Imagine holding a glass of water. That glass represents your total capacity for focused, intentional attention at any given moment. Now imagine that every notification your phone sends takes a small sip. Every background worry about an unfinished task takes a sip. Every tab you have open in your browser, every plan you are half holding in your head, every social media scroll you indulged in this morning. Each one takes a little something from the glass. By the time most people sit down to do their most important work, the glass is already more than half empty, and they have no idea why focus feels so difficult. This is the personal attention economy, and it is quietly costing people their best hours every single day. Attention is not a switch you flip on or off. It is closer to a muscle in its behavior. It fatigues with sustained use. It regenerates with genuine rest. It can be strengthened through deliberate practice and weakened through patterns of chronic misuse. And most people are not managing their attention at all. They are simply reacting to whoever or whatever is loudest in any given moment. Here is the neuroscience underneath this. The prefrontal cortex is the region of your brain most responsible for executive function, sustained focus, planning, decision-making, inhibiting impulses. It is also among the most metabolically expensive regions of the brain. When you sustain focused attention for long periods, you are consuming real biological resources, glucose, neurotransmitters, the actual machinery of thought itself. This is why the quality of decisions made late in the afternoon is consistently worse than decisions made on the same topic in the morning, even by the same person with the same information. It is not that you got lazier as the day progressed. It is that your brain was operating with progressively fewer cognitive resources. The mistake most ambitious people make is attempting to run at full cognitive intensity for 10, 12, 14 hours straight. They treat their brain like a machine that should produce equally good output at hour 12 as at hour 1. Then they wonder why their work feels inconsistent. Why some days they are sharp, creative, and decisive, while other days they feel like they are thinking through wet concrete. What are you doing with it? Many people spend those peak hours clearing email, attending meetings that could have been asynchronous communications, scrolling feeds, or engaging in low-value administrative tasks. By the time they sit down for their most important work, the window has closed. The glass is nearly empty. High performers protect their peak hours fiercely, not through perfect discipline or ironclad willpower, through structural design. They schedule deep work during peak hours by default. They make the default the right choice, rather than fighting for it every morning. Second, understand the devastating cost of task switching. Cognitive science research consistently finds that every time you shift from one type of task to another, your brain pays what researchers call a task switching cost. It takes time, typically several minutes of reduced performance, before you fully re-engage with the depth of focus you had before the interruption. A single interruption does not just cost you the time of the interruption itself. It costs you the minutes of degraded focus afterward. Multiply that cost by the dozens of interruptions the average knowledge worker experiences in a workday, and you begin to understand why so much time invested produces so little actual high-quality output. This is why the morning routines of consistently high performers tend to be remarkably quiet and intentional. Not because of superstition, because they understand that attention quality in hour 3 depends on how hours 1 and 2 were spent. Fourth, take recovery seriously as a legitimate component of attention management. True cognitive recovery during the workday does not happen through passive entertainment. Scrolling social media is not restful for the attention system. It is a different kind of demand. The perceptual system is still processing. The reward circuits are still being activated. The fragmentation is still happening. Chapter 2. Pressure as information. Pressure is not a malfunction. It is mobilization. Same body. Same sensations, completely different outcomes. Because interpretation is not just psychological. It has measurable neurological and hormonal consequences. When you interpret physiological arousal as anxiety, you activate threat-related neural processing. The amygdala becomes more dominant. Executive function is partially suppressed. The very cognitive tools you need to perform well under pressure become less available. When you reappraise that same arousal as excitement or readiness, you engage approach-oriented neural processing. The prefrontal cortex stays engaged. Executive function remains available. You can think clearly in the moment when clear thinking matters most. This reappraisal capacity is a genuine skill. And like all skills, it is built through practice, ideally practice that occurs in lower-stakes situations before you need it in high-stakes ones. The practice itself is simple. When you notice your body activating under pressure, rather than immediately labeling the sensation as nervousness, pause for one moment and deliberately reframe it. Try something like, "My body is preparing me. This activation is evidence that I care about this, and that my system is ready to meet the challenge. I am not anxious. I am ready." Notice that this is not false positivity. It is a physiologically accurate restatement. Your heart rate is elevated because your body is mobilizing. That is a fact. The nervousness narrative is an interpretation, not the fact itself. Beyond individual moments, understanding your personal pressure triggers is also genuinely valuable. What kinds of situations reliably activate your stress response? For most high achievers, it is situations where their competence is being evaluated, where failure has social visibility, where they care deeply about the outcome and the outcome is uncertain. These triggers are maps. They show you where your identity is most invested, where you care most deeply. And while that information can feel uncomfortable, it is also a form of self-knowledge that most people never fully access. The pressure you feel before things that matter to you is not your enemy. It is evidence of engagement. The goal is not to eliminate it. The goal is to learn to use it. Elite performers across every domain, from professional athletes to surgeons to concert musicians to elite military units, consistently report that pressure feels different once they have developed this relationship with it. Not absent, not neutralized, different. It becomes fuel rather than friction. And they get there not through personality, but through practice. Now, pressure in individual moments is one thing. But what about sustained pressure over time? What happens when demands are consistently high and recovery is consistently insufficient? When the stress does not let up? That is the psychology of burnout. And it is exactly what we need to look at next. Chapter 3. The Hidden Cost of Never Stopping. Core lesson. Recovery is not a reward for hard work. It is the biological condition that makes sustained hard work possible. There is a version of ambition that looks admirable from the outside and quietly dismantles you from the inside. It sounds like this. I will rest when the project is done. I can recover on weekends. This is a busy season, but after this sprint, everything will slow down. Just one more push, and then I will take care of myself. The terrible thing about this narrative is that it is partly true. People can sustain enormous output for weeks or even months on this model. The body and mind are remarkably resilient in the short term, but the adaptation they make to chronic overdemand without recovery is not neutral. It is degrading. And unlike a machine that shows obvious signs of mechanical failure, the degrading human mind often does not announce what is happening. The changes are gradual. The first things to go are the things hardest to notice. Creativity, nuance in decision-making, emotional regulation, empathy, the capacity for genuine enthusiasm. By the time most people recognize they are in burnout, they have been in it for months. Here is the neurological reality that makes recovery non-negotiable. The brain is not a machine that produces output continuously until the tank runs empty. It is a biological system built for cycles. The sleep cycle is the most obvious example. During deep sleep, the brain does not simply rest. It performs critical maintenance that cannot be performed while awake. The glymphatic system, a waste clearance mechanism that flushes metabolic byproducts from brain tissue, is primarily active during sleep. Memory consolidation happens during sleep. Emotional processing and regulation are restored during sleep. Neurochemical balances that support sustained motivation and executive function are reset during sleep. When you consistently cut sleep to extend your working hours, you are not gaining time. You are trading your most intensive cognitive maintenance window for more hours of increasingly degraded performance. The math does not work. You are getting less done, not more, with the extra hours bought at the cost of sleep. Beyond sleep, the concept of ultradian rhythms is worth understanding. These are roughly 90-minute cycles of higher and lower cognitive alertness that your brain moves through continuously throughout the day. Elite performance researchers like Peretz-Levy and others have found that working with these cycles, rather than attempting to override them with caffeine and willpower, produces significantly better sustained output over a full day. The practical implication is that genuine breaks every 90 minutes of intensive focus are not indulgences. They are cycle completions. They allow the brain to transition through a lower demand phase, restore certain neurotransmitter levels, and prepare for the next high demand phase. Ignoring these signals does not eliminate them. It just means you are operating in the low phase while trying to produce high phase quality output, which is why so many afternoon hours produce work that needs to be substantially redone the next morning. Clinical burnout, as distinct from simple tiredness, has three specific psychological dimensions identified by researchers Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter. The first is emotional exhaustion, the feeling of having nothing left to give, of running on empty not just physically but emotionally. The second is depersonalization, a growing detachment from the work and the people it involves. A cynicism that was not there before. A sense of going through motions rather than genuinely engaging. The third is reduced personal accomplishment, the creeping sense that effort no longer produces meaningful results. That you are working hard but nothing is actually changing. This third dimension is particularly dangerous because it mimics low motivation. From the outside, a burned-out person can look like someone who has simply stopped caring. From the inside, it feels like the connection between effort and result has been severed, and that disconnection is profoundly demoralizing. The path out of burnout and, more importantly, the path around it, requires treating recovery as a genuine performance variable rather than a personal indulgence. This starts with sleep protection. 8 hours is not laziness. For most adults, it is the biological requirement for full cognitive and emotional function. Cutting it to 6 hours for months at a time is not efficiency. It is a performance tax you pay with your best thinking. It also requires active recovery practices during the workday, not passive entertainment, which does not truly restore the attention system, but genuine disengagement from cognitive demands. Time in nature, which research consistently shows has measurable restorative effects on directed attention. Brief meditation or controlled breathing practices. Physical movement. Quiet. Now, even with excellent recovery practices, there is still the question of what to do when things go wrong. When effort does not produce the intended result. When the work falls short. When failure arrives. How you process those moments determines almost everything about what comes after them. Chapter 4. Reframing failure. Core lesson. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the primary mechanism through which success is built. There is a moment most driven people know intimately. You try something. You prepare. You put real effort in. And then it does not work. The presentation falls flat. The project misses its targets. The relationship does not go the way you hoped. The attempt fails. And before the rational mind can step in with perspective, something happens below the surface. A sharp interior contraction. A flash of something very close to shame. A voice that has no interest in being fair or accurate, that simply says this means something about who you are. That moment is one of the most consequential moments in any ambitious person's life. Not because of what happened, but because of what happens next. The story you tell yourself in the aftermath of failure is the story that shapes your next attempt. Carol Dweck's research on mindset is well known, but worth revisiting in depth, because the depth is where the practical application lives. In a fixed mindset, ability is understood as a stable, inherent trait. You are either smart or you are not. Talented or not. A natural leader or not. In this framework, performance is primarily evidence of what you have. Success confirms the trait. Failure threatens it. This creates a very specific psychological problem. If failure is a potential verdict about a fixed trait, then every challenging situation carries existential risk. Not just the risk of a bad outcome, but the risk of discovering something terrible and permanent about yourself. The stakes of every attempt are not just external. They are internal and identity-threatening. People in a fixed mindset respond predictably to this risk. They avoid challenges where failure is meaningfully possible. They choose tasks they already know they can complete. They interpret effort itself with ambivalence, because if something requires effort, maybe it is evidence that the innate ability is not there. They struggle to respond constructively to feedback because feedback threatens the self-image they are trying to protect. In a growth mindset, ability is understood as a developing capacity, not fixed, not predetermined. something that grows through effort, practice, and effective strategy. In this framework, difficulty is not threatening. It is where growth actually happens. Failure is not a verdict. It is a data point that clarifies exactly where the gap is between current ability and desired ability. The performance implications of this shift are enormous. People in a growth mindset seek out challenges precisely because difficulty is where improvement lives. They treat effort as the mechanism of growth rather than evidence of its absence. They engage constructively with feedback because feedback is information and information is useful. And crucially, they recover from failure more quickly and more productively. Because failure is not an identity event. It is a learning event. And learning events are the whole point. The most important practical tool here is what performance psychologists call structured failure debriefing. Rather than letting a failure simply sting and fade into vague discouragement, you treat it with the same precision a pilot applies to a flight incident report. What specifically happened? At what point did the actual outcome diverge from the intended one? What were the specific inputs that led to this specific result? Were there warning signals that were available but not acted on? What was within your control and what was not? What would you do differently now with this information? This is not a punishing process. It is a clarifying one. Precision transforms failure from an emotional event into a technical learning. And technical learnings are the building blocks of genuine competence. The second essential tool is the practice of separating failure from identity. Language matters here more than most people realize. I failed at this attempt is a description of an event. I am a failure is a definition of a person. These are not the same thing, and they do not produce the same subsequent behavior. Every time you narrate a failure as information rather than identity, you are doing something with genuine neurological consequences. You are training the part of your brain that evaluates threat and decides whether to approach or avoid future challenges. Failure narrated as information signals approach. Failure narrated as identity signals avoidance. Elite performers across every domain fail more than average performers. This is not a coincidence. It is a feature. They attempt more. They take more creative risks. They put themselves in more situations where meaningful failure is possible. And they have developed the psychological architecture to process those failures productively rather than destructively. The goal is not to stop caring about failure. Caring about results is healthy. It means you are genuinely invested. The goal is to stop letting the fear of failure prevent you from taking the actions required to eventually produce success. And the internal story through which you understand failure is not the only story shaping your performance. There is a deeper story, the one about who you fundamentally are. That is where we are going next. Chapter 5. Identity as Architecture. Core lesson. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. Here is a question that most people answer with pure fantasy when they first encounter it, and with uncomfortable clarity when they sit with it longer. What does the version of you who has already become what you want to become actually do on a Tuesday morning? Not the exceptional Tuesday when everything is going well. The ordinary, slightly tired, slightly distracted Tuesday when nothing external is compelling you in any particular direction. That answer reveals your identity more accurately than any aspiration or goal you could name. Because behavior, real behavior over time, flows from identity. Not from goals. Not from motivation. Not from inspiration. From the ongoing narrative you hold about who you fundamentally are. The connection between identity and behavior is not just philosophical. It is mechanistic. Human beings have a very powerful drive for behavioral consistency with their self-concept. When your actions align with your self-concept, you feel comfortable, coherent, and at ease. When your actions diverge from your self-concept, you experience cognitive dissonance, a kind of psychological friction that the brain is highly motivated to resolve. The resolution can go in one of two directions. You can change your behavior to match the identity, or you can change the story to justify the behavior. People who tell themselves they are not disciplined will find that any discipline they manage to impose eventually collapses. Not because they are weak-willed, because every act of discipline creates dissonance with the identity narrative. And the brain quietly resolves that dissonance by drifting back toward what the narrative says is normal. This is why willpower-based approaches to behavior change have such disappointing long-term success rates. Willpower is a conscious override of an automatic identity-driven behavioral pattern. It is costly. It fatigues. It requires continuous effort to maintain against the opposing current of identity. The more durable approach is identity first change. Rather than asking what do I need to do, ask who do I need to become? Rather than trying to impose a new behavior on top of an old identity, work on updating the identity itself. And here is the counterintuitive part. Identity is not updated through declarations or affirmations. It is updated through evidence, through the accumulation of behavioral votes. Every time you act consistently with the person you are trying to become, you cast a vote for that identity. Every focused work session you complete, every commitment to yourself that you keep, every time you choose the slightly harder path that aligns with your values rather than the easier path that does not, you are not just performing an action, you are building a case. And over time, the case becomes convincing. The brain looks at the accumulated evidence and updates its model. This is a person who does this. This is who I am. The votes do not need to be large. The scale of the action matters far less than the consistency of the direction. A 5-minute focused work session that you actually complete is more identity building than a 4-hour session you planned and abandoned. Because the completed session, however small, says to your nervous system, this is what people like me do. And the abandoned one says the opposite. There is also a form of identity that actively resists growth, and it is worth naming directly because many high achievers are trapped by it. If your identity is built around being the person who handles everything independently, asking for help feels like a betrayal of your fundamental nature. If your identity is built around being capable and unaffected by hardship, admitting you are struggling feels threatening rather than honest. If your identity is built around being the hardest working person in any room, taking genuine rest feels uncomfortably close to weakness. These identity structures often developed as genuine adaptations to real challenges. They served you at some point. The problem is when they harden into ceilings. When the story that once protected you begins limiting you. The work of identity-based growth sometimes requires examining which parts of your self-narrative are accurate reflections of who you genuinely are, and which are outdated scripts running on autopilot. You are a story in progress, not a fixed entity, and you have more authorship over that story than most people ever claim. Chapter 6. The Weight of Too Much. Core lesson. Cognitive overload does not just slow you down. It temporarily changes the quality of the person you are. Picture a computer running one focused program. Fast, responsive, precise. Now picture the same computer running 40 programs simultaneously while constantly receiving new installation requests. It does not crash immediately, but everything slows. Errors begin appearing. Responses become unpredictable. The processor is overwhelmed, and every single function suffers. Your brain under cognitive overload is this computer, and the consequence is not just slowed performance. It is a genuine, measurable change in cognitive and emotional function. Cognitive load refers to the total amount of information your working memory is actively processing at any moment. Working memory is the mental workspace where conscious thought happens, where you hold information, manipulate it, connect it to other information, and act on it. And it has a famously strict capacity limit. Researchers estimate it can actively hold between 4 and 7 chunks of information at once under ideal conditions. Under real-world conditions of distraction and competing demands, often significantly less. When working memory capacity is exceeded, the brain does not politely cue the excess. It degrades. Attention becomes fragmented. Error rates increase. Creative thinking diminishes, because creative thinking requires holding multiple divergent ideas simultaneously, which requires precisely the working memory capacity that is most depleted under overload. Emotional regulation weakens, because emotional regulation is a cognitively demanding process that draws on the same executive resources as complex thinking. This last point is worth pausing on. Under high cognitive load, you do not just think worse. You feel worse. You are less patient, less empathetic, more reactive, more likely to make decisions from a place of frustration or anxiety rather than clear-eyed assessment. Cognitive overload does not just change your output. It changes who you are in the moment. And modern life is a masterclass in generating overload. The information environment most people inhabit now would be genuinely incomprehensible to someone from a century ago. The volume of inputs, the rate of context switching, the constant availability demanded by digital communication, the ambient background hum of social comparison, news anxiety, and notification management. These are not neutral features of the modern world. They are cognitive demands, and they accumulate. Understanding what actually fills up cognitive load is the first step to managing it. Unfinished tasks are among the most significant but least recognized contributors. When you start something and leave it incomplete, your brain maintains what psychologists call an open loop, an active file that the mind keeps checking, asking whether it has been resolved. This is the Zeigarnik effect, and it is real. Unfinished tasks consume working memory bandwidth even when you are not consciously thinking about them. This is why people with long lists of undone items feel scattered even when they're trying to focus on something specific. The unfinished business is running in the background, sipping from the glass. Decision-making is another major load driver. Every choice consumes cognitive resources. Research by Roy Baumeister and others on decision fatigue found that the quality of decisions reliably declines over the course of a day, not because people become careless, but because the cognitive resources required for high-quality decision-making deplete with use. This is why some of the most cognitively disciplined people in history systematize their low-stakes decisions as aggressively as possible. Fewer decisions means more cognitive capacity for the decisions that genuinely matter. Worry is the third major contributor. Anticipatory anxiety about future events, rumination about past ones, background social anxiety about how you are perceived, all of these run as continuous background processes consuming working memory capacity that could otherwise be available for the task in front of you. So how do you manage all of this deliberately? External capture is the single highest leverage intervention. Get things out of your head and into a trusted external system. The specific system matters far less than the consistency. When your brain knows that a task, idea, or concern has been reliably captured somewhere outside your head, it can release the open loop. The background checking stops. The bandwidth is freed. Decision reduction is the second major strategy. Identify the decisions in your life that repeat regularly and systematize them. Morning routines, default meals, standard meeting formats, recurring work processes. Every decision you systematize is cognitive capacity preserved for decisions that actually require your full intelligence. Completion cycles matter more than most people realize. There is a real neurological satisfaction in finishing things, and it is not just emotional. Completion closes the Zeigarnik loops. It frees the working memory that was holding those open files. Finishing something, even something small, genuinely clears space. And regular periods of genuine cognitive solitude, real mental quiet without competing inputs, allow the default mode network to do its integrative work. The insights, connections, and creative solutions that emerge seemingly from nowhere during a shower or a walk are not random. They are the product of the integrative processing that the brain can only do when it is not being bombarded with external demands. Managing cognitive load is not about doing less work. It is about doing important work with a mind that has the capacity to actually do it well. That distinction changes everything. Chapter 7. Engineering Flow. Core lesson: flow states are not gifts. They are predictable outcomes of specific, learnable conditions. There are moments in work that feel different from the rest. Time seems to move differently. The task that normally requires effortful concentration seems to unfold naturally. You are not fighting yourself. You are not managing distraction. You are simply inside the work, moving with it. Your awareness and the task feel merged. Afterward, looking back, you wonder where the time went. And the work produced in that state is often the best you do. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying this experience across thousands of people in dozens of domains. Concert pianists, rock climbers, surgeons, chess grandmasters, assembly line workers, parents, poets. He called it flow, and his central finding was both exciting and actionable. Flow is not a personality trait available only to some people. It is a neurological state accessible to virtually anyone. And it is not random. It is the predictable consequence of specific conditions being met. Understanding those conditions means you can create them deliberately. You can engineer flow rather than simply hoping to stumble into it. The first condition is clear goals. The brain needs an unambiguous target to orient toward. When you begin a work session without knowing specifically what success looks like for that session, your attention has no defined destination. It drifts. It self-interrupts. It generates the mental restlessness that prevents flow from emerging. Before every focused work session, spend 2 minutes identifying the single most important thing you will accomplish. Not a list. One thing. The specificity is what allows the brain to allocate attention with the directionality that flow requires. The second condition is immediate feedback. Your brain needs to know how it is doing in real time, not at the end of the project. Now, this is one of the reasons flow is easier to access in certain domains than others. A musician hears immediately whether the note was right. A surgeon sees immediately whether the cut was precise. A basketball player sees immediately whether the shot went in. For knowledge workers, feedback is often delayed. The report will be evaluated next week. The strategy will be assessed next quarter. Creating your own proximate feedback mechanisms is one of the most important things a knowledge worker can do for their flow capacity. What signal will tell you in this session that the work is going well? How will you know you are making progress? The third condition is the challenge-skill balance, and it is the most nuanced of the group. Flow does not emerge in the comfort zone. When a task is well within your current skill level, the brain disengages. Boredom sets in. Attention wanders. But flow also does not emerge and overwhelm. When the challenge substantially exceeds your current ability, anxiety dominates the experience. You become too focused on avoiding failure to fully engage with the work itself. The flow channel exists in a narrow band between boredom and anxiety. The task must be just slightly beyond comfortable, meaningfully challenging without being genuinely overwhelming. This precise calibration is why elite performers in every domain are so careful about the level of challenge they expose themselves to in practice. Not too easy, not too hard, just at the edge. And that edge shifts as you grow, which means that maintaining your access to flow requires progressively increasing the challenges you take on as your skill develops. This is not a bug. It is the design. The pursuit of flow is the pursuit of growth. The fourth condition is concentrated attention. Flow is neurologically incompatible with divided attention. The phone nearby with notifications. The browser with 12 tabs. The awareness of the next meeting in 40 minutes. These are not just potential distractions. They are competing inputs that prevent the singular concentration flow requires. Creating the conditions for flow means temporarily removing those competing inputs. Not forever, just for the duration of the session. Phone in another room. One document open. Calendar blocked, door closed, or headphones on. This is not perfectionism. It is honoring the cognitive requirements of the state you are trying to enter. The fifth condition is what researchers call autotelic engagement. The work needs to feel meaningful in itself during the session. Not just instrumentally valuable, not just connected to a distant reward, but genuinely engaging right now. For many people, this means finding the angle of genuine interest within a task, even one that is not inherently exciting. The craft aspect, the puzzle dimension, the performance challenge of doing it with exceptional precision. Even mundane tasks can become gateways to flow if you approach them as a performance challenge rather than an obligation to be discharged. A pre-flow ritual dramatically increases the reliability of your access to this state. Most high performers have one, whether they have named it or not. A specific sequence of actions that, through consistent repetition, has become paired with the focused state. It might be a particular kind of music or deliberate silence, a specific physical arrangement of the workspace, a brief review of the session goal, 5 minutes of journaling. The content of the ritual matters less than its consistency. The brain is an extraordinary pattern recognition engine. When you consistently pair a sequence of actions with a specific cognitive state, the sequence begins to trigger the state automatically. The ritual becomes a cue, and the cue begins the transition. One final and important note. Flow does not arrive instantly. There is almost always a transition period of 10 to 20 minutes after you begin focused work before the state deepens into genuine flow. During this period, concentration is effortful. Resistance is common. The impulse to check the phone or switch tasks is strongest precisely in this window. Most people give up during the transition. They mistake the normal difficulty of early focus for evidence that the work is not going well, and they interrupt the process before it has a chance to deepen. Stay with it. Trust the process. The state deepens on the other side of the resistance. And what you find there is among the most valuable experiences available in a working life. Chapter 8. The Discipline of Getting Better. Core lesson. Time invested in practice does not automatically produce improvement. Deliberate practice, designed to stretch the edge of your ability with clear feedback, does. The 10,000 hours idea has become one of the most widely cited and most thoroughly misunderstood ideas in popular psychology. The original research, by Anders Ericsson, never said that 10,000 hours produces expertise. It said that elite performers across multiple domains had, on average, accumulated approximately that much practice. The crucial variable, the one that actually predicted expertise, was the quality of that practice, not the hours. Ericsson's distinction between naive practice and deliberate practice is one of the most practically important concepts in the science of skill development. Naive practice is doing the thing you can already do, playing the songs you have already mastered, having the conversations you are already comfortable with, writing in the style you have already developed, solving the category of problems you have already solved many times before. Naive practice feels productive because activity is occurring. Actual improvement is minimal because you are operating in the comfort zone of existing competence rather than at the edge of developing competence. Deliberate practice is fundamentally different in character. It is practice specifically designed to move you beyond your current level. It is uncomfortable by design because it operates at the boundary of your current ability, where performance is most error-prone and most instructive. Deliberate practice has 4 defining characteristics. First, it targets a specific aspect of skill that is currently below the desired level. Not practice of the whole skill. Practice of a specific component. A musician practicing the particularly difficult passage in measure 47 rather than running through the whole piece again. A public speaker working specifically on managing pauses rather than rehearsing the whole talk again. Second, it requires full concentration. You cannot do deliberate practice while distracted or comfortable. The cognitive engagement required is too high. Deliberate practice is, by its nature, effortful. Third, it incorporates immediate feedback, either from a coach, from your own careful attention, from recordings you review, or from metrics you track. Without feedback, you do not know whether the adjustment you made was an improvement or a regression. And without that knowledge, you cannot direct the next adjustment intelligently. Fourth, it involves repetition with reflection. Not the same action repeated mindlessly, but the same action attempted, evaluated, and refined. The evaluation is what turns repetition into improvement. For most professionals who do not have a coach observing their daily work, building your own deliberate practice system requires intentional design. This might look like recording and carefully reviewing your own presentations or teaching sessions, soliciting specific, structured feedback from people capable of giving it, maintaining performance journals where you track specific metrics over time, conducting regular postmortems on both your best work and your worst. The mental models dimension of skill development is also worth addressing explicitly. Every domain of genuine expertise is partly a library of mental models, conceptual frameworks for interpreting situations, recognizing patterns, and generating responses. The expert does not just know more facts than the novice. They have more refined lenses through which to see the same situations. Building your mental model library requires both depth and breadth. Depth in your primary domain, developing increasingly sophisticated frameworks for the situations you encounter most, and breadth across domains, because some of the most powerful insights come from importing a mental model from an unrelated field into your primary one. A principle from ecology might illuminate an organizational dynamics problem. A concept from information theory might clarify a communication challenge. A framework from evolutionary biology might reshape how you understand competitive markets. The breadth of your mental model library is a genuine and underestimated competitive advantage. The practical reframe for this chapter is simple and demands honesty. Stop measuring your growth in hours invested. Start measuring it in specific skills developed. What can you do today that you could not do a month ago? What specific feedback did you receive this week? What adjustment did you make as a result? If you cannot answer those questions with specifics, you may be practicing, but you are probably not developing. Chapter 9. The True Source of Confidence. Core lesson. Confidence is not a feeling you wait for. It is a rational conclusion your nervous system draws from accumulated evidence about your capacity. The mythology around confidence is one of the most practically harmful ideas in popular self-development. The idea that confidence is something you either have or you do not, that it is a personality trait distributed unevenly at birth, that some people are just naturally confident while others are destined to struggle with self-doubt. This view is both scientifically inaccurate and psychologically damaging. It turns something learnable into something fixed, something buildable into something inherited. Here is what confidence actually is at the neurological level. It is a Bayesian estimate. It is your nervous system's ongoing calculation of the probability that you can successfully execute a particular behavior in a particular context, based on accumulated evidence from your experience. When the evidence base is rich, when you have successfully done this thing many times in varied conditions, the estimate is high. The confidence is real and durable. When the evidence base is thin, when this is new territory or the stakes are higher than anything you have encountered before, the estimate is lower. And the confidence reflects that accurately. This is not a problem with your character. It is your nervous system doing its job. The calculation is honest. The implication is critical. You cannot build lasting confidence through affirmations alone. Positive self-talk in the absence of supporting evidence is not confidence. It is wishful thinking with a cheerful narration. And it tends to collapse the moment it encounters a real test, which makes the collapse feel even more devastating. Genuine confidence is built through the same process that builds any other competence. Deliberate exposure, in graduated doses, to the situations that currently produce the lowest estimates. Successful navigation of those situations. Accumulation of evidence. Updating of the estimate. Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy is the most precise scientific framework for understanding this. Self-efficacy is domain-specific. It is your belief in your capacity to execute a particular type of behavior in a particular context, and it is not generalized. High self-efficacy in one area does not automatically transfer to another. A world-class surgeon can have low self-efficacy around public speaking. A championship debater can have low self-efficacy around romantic relationships. Bandura identified 4 sources of self-efficacy, in descending order of potency. The most powerful is mastery experience. Direct personal experience of having successfully executed the behavior. When you have done the thing and done it well, in real conditions, the evidence is direct and compelling. This is why graduated exposure, actually doing the thing rather than preparing to do it indefinitely, is so essential to building confidence in any domain. The second source is vicarious experience. Watching someone with comparable background and ability successfully do what you are trying to do. When you observe someone at your level achieve the outcome you are aiming for, your nervous system updates its estimate of what someone like you can accomplish. The third source is social persuasion. Being told by someone you genuinely respect that you have what it takes. This matters, particularly in early stages of skill development, before your own evidence base is rich enough to be the primary input. The fourth source is physiological state. When your body is adequately rested, well nourished, and physically functioning well, confidence is more accessible. When you are exhausted, hungry, or physically unwell, your nervous system's capacity estimate drops across almost every domain. This is not psychological weakness. It is physiology. And it is one more powerful argument for taking recovery, sleep, and physical health seriously as performance variables. The practical path to more confidence in any specific area is not mysterious. Identify the situations in that area where you currently feel least capable. Design a graduated exposure sequence, starting with situations that are challenging but manageable. Engage with those situations deliberately. Build the track record. Let the evidence accumulate. And while you are doing that, manage the physiological variables. Sleep. Move. Eat with the intelligence your nervous system deserves. Take care of the container that your confidence operates within. Confidence does not require the absence of doubt. The most capable people still experience uncertainty. What they have that less experienced people do not is enough evidence to act despite the doubt. They move forward not because they have eliminated uncertainty, but because they trust their capacity to handle what they find on the other side of it. That earned Evidence-based trust in oneself is among the most powerful things a person can build, and it is built the same way everything else worth having is built. One difficult, deliberate, imperfect step at a time. Chapter 10. The narrator in your head. Core lesson. The voice inside your mind is your most intimate and most powerful relationship. Learning to work with it transforms what is possible under pressure. Between waking and sleeping, a continuous stream of thought flows through your mind. Assessments of what is happening, predictions about what might happen next, memories surfacing without obvious invitation, evaluations of yourself, your work, your relationships, your future, judgments, comparisons, questions, stories. Most people have a very limited relationship with this voice. They do not observe it. They simply are it. Every thought that arises feels like the truth. Every self-evaluation feels like a fact. Every catastrophic prediction feels like a valid assessment of what is coming. But here is what years of cognitive psychology research have established with considerable consistency. The automatic thoughts that arise in your mind are not reliable narrators. They are fast, pattern-matching heuristics. They prioritize speed and threat detection over accuracy. They are heavily influenced by your current physiological state, your recent experiences, and the cognitive load you are carrying. They are often wrong. And the internal critic in particular, the voice that evaluates performance and finds it wanting, is almost never calibrated to serve your growth. It is calibrated, quite often, to protect your current self-concept by discouraging the risk-taking that might challenge it. The distinction between useful self-evaluation and destructive self-attack is one of the most practically important distinctions a high performer can learn to make. They look similar from the outside. They feel similar in the moment. But they produce dramatically different consequences. Useful self-evaluation is specific, behavioral, and forward-facing. That approach did not produce the outcome I wanted. Here is specifically what went wrong. Here is what I would adjust for the next attempt. It is honest without being cruel. It focuses on what is changeable rather than on what is fixed. Destructive self-attack is global, identity-based, and backward-facing. I cannot believe I did that. Something is fundamentally wrong with me. I am always going to struggle with this. I should have known better. These narrations do not improve future performance. They deplete the emotional resources needed for future attempts. They make the next attempt less likely, not better. The research on the relationship between internal self-talk and performance is robust. Athletes whose internal dialogue during competition was process-focused and specific, watch the ball, breathe, stay low, first step quick, performed significantly better than those whose internal dialogue had drifted into outcome-based worry or global self-criticism, and not by a small margin. Cognitive behavioral therapy developed a powerful set of tools for working with unhelpful automatic thoughts, and those tools translate powerfully into performance contexts. Cognitive diffusion is perhaps the most practically accessible. The technique involves changing your relationship to a thought rather than trying to eliminate it. Instead of treating the thought as reality, you observe it as an event occurring in your mind. Rather than I am not good enough, which feels like a fact about you, you shift to my mind is generating the story that I am not good enough right now. Notice the difference. In the second version, you are the observer of the thought rather than its captive. And as the observer, you have options. You can acknowledge the thought without being controlled by it. You can redirect your attention to what is actually useful in this moment. Implementation intentions are another powerful tool for managing performance, disrupting self-talk. The research by Peter Gallwitzer and others shows that pre-deciding your response to a challenging situation, in the specific form of when situation X occurs, I will do Y, dramatically increases the probability that you will actually execute the intended response under pressure. Applied to internal narrative, this might look like, when I notice the self-critical voice escalating before a presentation, I will take one conscious breath, acknowledge that my mind is trying to protect me, and redirect my attention to the specific opening line I have prepared. The response is decided in advance, in a calm moment when cognitive resources are high. So when the challenging moment arrives and cognitive resources are compromised by stress, the response is already cued. It does not require the full deliberative processing that might not be available. The relationship you develop with your internal narrator is one of the most intimate and consequential relationships in your life. More intimate, in some ways, than any external relationship. because it is always present. In every challenge, every performance, every quiet moment. Learning to be a wise steward of that voice, rather than its passive recipient, is genuinely transformative work. Chapter 11. Cognitive Flexibility and the Adaptive Mind. Core lesson. The most valuable thinking skill is not knowing more. It is the ability to think differently when situations change. There is a quality of mind that becomes more valuable the faster the world changes. Not the ability to know more, though that helps. Not the ability to think faster, though that matters. But the ability to think differently, to shift frames, to update models, to hold uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. This is cognitive flexibility. And in an environment defined by constant change, ambiguous information, and situations that do not fit neatly into any existing template, it may be the most important cognitive capacity of our moment. Cognitive rigidity is not stupidity. It is often the shadow side of expertise. The person who has found an approach that works and has refined it over years has a powerful competency. The problem is that this competency can evolve into an inability to recognize when the context has changed and the approach no longer applies. The most dangerous moment for an expert is often not when they are facing something completely new. It is when they are facing something new that looks familiar enough to trigger their existing templates. They apply the framework that worked before, and they are genuinely confused when it fails in ways they cannot account for, because they are looking at the new situation through lenses calibrated for a different one. Cognitive flexibility is the capacity to notice when this is happening, to step back from the current frame and ask, am I seeing this situation as it is, or as my existing models assume it must be? The first component of cognitive flexibility is perspective taking, the genuine ability to inhabit another person's vantage point, not just intellectually acknowledge that it exists, but actually model how the world looks from inside their experience. This matters in every domain where human beings interact, which is to say, every domain. Research on negotiation, leadership, conflict resolution, and creative problem-solving consistently finds that perspective-taking ability is among the strongest predictors of performance. The leader who can genuinely model the experience of the people they lead makes better decisions and earns more trust. The negotiator who can genuinely inhabit the other party's interests, not just their positions, finds solutions that better people cannot find. Perspective-taking is not a fixed trait. It is a practice skill. You develop it by deliberately and rigorously doing the exercise of asking, what does this situation look like from where they are standing? What do they need from this interaction that they may not be saying directly? What are they afraid of that is shaping their behavior? The second component is frame shifting, the ability to deliberately look at the same situation through multiple analytical lenses. A problem that looks intractable through one frame often reveals solutions when viewed through another. A conflict that seems irresolvable when framed as a competition often becomes navigable when reframed as a shared challenge. The practice of frame shifting involves deliberately asking, what is the other way to look at this? If the opposite of my current interpretation were true, what would I see? What frame would a person in a completely different field bring to this problem? The third component is intellectual humility, the genuine willingness to update your beliefs when evidence warrants it. This is stated simply and practiced with great difficulty, because human beings are equipped with extraordinarily powerful motivated reasoning systems. We are better at generating arguments for our existing beliefs than at genuinely evaluating evidence against them. We mistake familiarity for accuracy. We mistake confidence for correctness. Developing intellectual humility as a practice involves specific habits. Before reaching a conclusion, deliberately generate the strongest possible case against it. When someone disagrees with you, work to genuinely understand the strongest version of their argument before responding to it. Ask yourself regularly, what would it take to change my mind about this? If the honest answer is nothing, you have stopped holding a belief. You have adopted a dogma. The fourth component is comfort with ambiguity, the ability to hold a question open, to resist premature closure, to remain functional and effective while navigating genuine uncertainty. Many high achievers are deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity because their success has been built on the ability to find answers, resolve uncertainties, and move toward clear outcomes. But many of the most important situations in professional and personal life involve genuine complexity that does not resolve quickly, and the premature certainty that resolves the discomfort of ambiguity too early often cuts off better options, misses important information, and produces decisions that look decisive but are actually just hasty. Building comfort with ambiguity means practicing staying in the question, noticing the discomfort of not yet knowing without immediately moving to eliminate it, recognizing that the discomfort of uncertainty is information about the complexity of the situation, not a problem to be urgently solved. The cognitively flexible mind is not the indecisive mind. It is the mind that can commit fully to a course of action while simultaneously maintaining genuine openness to updating that course when the evidence warrants. Those two capacities are not contradictory. Together, they describe the kind of thinking that produces excellent decisions in complex environments. Chapter 12. Building the environment that builds you. Core lesson. Willpower is finite and expensive. Environmental design is reliable and cheap. Optimize the former by investing in the latter. Here is a finding from behavioral science that most people find simultaneously obvious in retrospect and completely underutilized in practice. The strongest predictor of whether a person will do something is not their intention, not their motivation, not their character, but how easy or difficult the environment makes it to do it. This is not a cynical view of human nature. It is an accurate one, and understanding it correctly is not disempowering. It is immensely practical, because environments can be designed. The research on choice architecture and behavioral defaults, developed by economists Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein among others, demonstrates consistently that the default option in any system has a disproportionate influence on behavior. When the easy, default action is the beneficial one, beneficial behavior dramatically increases. When the easy, default action is the harmful one, harmful behavior increases with equal reliability. Organ donation rates across countries are the classic example. Countries where organ donation is the default, where you must actively opt out rather than opt in, have donation rates above 90%. Countries where donation requires active opt-in have rates below 30%. Same people, same values. Profoundly different outcomes because of environmental design. The implications for personal performance are direct and immediate. Consider your phone. Research by Adrian Ward and colleagues at the University of Texas found that the mere presence of a smartphone on a desk, even face down and silenced, measurably reduces available working memory and fluid intelligence. The brain allocates cognitive resources to managing the potential interruption, even when consciously no attention is being paid to the device. The phone does not need to interrupt you to tax your cognitive performance. Its presence is sufficient. This finding should be both alarming and action-prompting. Your phone, sitting on your desk during your most important work, is making you measurably less intelligent. Moving it to another room during focused work sessions is not a dramatic lifestyle change. It is a 2-second environmental adjustment with measurable cognitive benefits. This is friction engineering applied to the negative. You are adding environmental friction to the behavior you want to reduce. The small additional effort required to retrieve the phone from another room is often enough to interrupt the automatic checking impulse. The impulse arrives. The usual path is blocked. The interruption does not happen. Friction engineering applied to positive behaviors works the same way in reverse. You reduce friction on the paths toward beneficial behaviors, making them easier, more automatic, more likely. Want to exercise more consistently? Sleep in your workout clothes, or lay them out the night before. Make the first decision of the morning one of configuration rather than choice. The clothes are there. Getting out of bed in them carries an implicit message. Want to eat better? Keep the healthy food at eye level in the refrigerator and the less healthy options less accessible. The research on food consumption consistently shows that what gets eaten is heavily influenced by what requires the least effort to reach. Want to read more? Put the book you want to read on your pillow every morning. When you get into bed, it is already there. The barrier is zero. Want to meditate more consistently? Keep a timer or a meditation cushion in a visible, accessible location rather than buried in a closet that requires effort to access. The cumulative effect of these small environmental changes is substantial. You are not relying on having sufficient willpower in each individual moment. You are restructuring the moment itself so that the beneficial behavior is the easiest available option. Cue design is the second major lever of environmental architecture. Behavior follows cues. This is the basic mechanism of habit formation. When you consistently pair a specific context with a specific behavior, the context becomes a cue that triggers the behavior with decreasing amounts of deliberate intention. This is why dedicated workspaces matter. When you consistently do focused work in a specific location, configured in a specific way, that configuration becomes a powerful cue for the cognitive state associated with focused work. The moment you sit in that chair, with that lamp on, in that arrangement, your brain begins transitioning toward the focused state. The environment is doing behavioral work that would otherwise require willpower. This is also why doing everything in the same space undermines the cueing effect. If you use your bed for work, for entertainment, for socializing, and for sleeping, the bed carries no clear behavioral signal. It is a mixed context environment that primes no particular state. The brain does not know what to do there. The social environment is the third, and perhaps most underestimated, dimension of environmental design. The norms of your social group, what is considered normal, expected, and admirable among the people you spend the most time with, shape your behavior with enormous and largely invisible influence. Not through explicit pressure, through the quiet mechanism of what feels natural and ordinary versus what feels effortful and exceptional. In a social environment where focused work, physical health, intellectual curiosity, and honest self-examination are common and valued, those behaviors become normal. They require less effort. They feel less exceptional. In a social environment where those things are uncommon or quietly discouraged, they require constant effort against the grain of what surrounds you. You cannot always choose your professional environment or your family, but you can be intentional about whose norms you are regularly exposed to, the communities you join, the people you spend discretionary time with, the voices you regularly hear. The digital environment deserves its own acknowledgement. The applications on your devices, the accounts you follow, the algorithm you have trained through your attention, the notifications you permit, these are not neutral features. They are environments with built-in agendas. Agendas primarily oriented toward capturing and holding your attention, not toward your long-term well-being or deepest goals. Taking deliberate control of your digital environment, regularly auditing who and what has access to your attention, and redesigning that environment in service of your actual goals rather than someone else's engagement metrics, is one of the highest leverage acts of self-care available in the modern world. You are not just the product of your intentions. You are the product of your intentions operating within your environment. And you have far more design authority over that environment than most people ever exercise. Chapter 13. Living with a long game mentality. Core lesson. Short-term thinking optimizes for comfort. Long game thinking optimizes for meaning. And meaning is the only fuel that sustains extraordinary performance across a lifetime. There is a particular quality visible in people who have built something genuinely extraordinary over time. Not the ones who had a spectacular year or two and then faded. The ones who compounded, who grew, who kept producing valuable work across decades. It is not raw talent. It is not even discipline in the conventional sense of gritting your teeth through discomfort. It is something more fundamental. A relationship with time that most people never develop. It is the long game mentality. The long game mentality is characterized by a specific kind of temporal orientation. The ability and willingness to hold the future self as a present concern. To make decisions in the present that your future self will be grateful for, even when those decisions create present moment discomfort or inconvenience. This is harder than it sounds, because the human brain is wired for temporal discounting. The technical term for a cognitive bias that prioritizes immediate rewards over future ones, even when the future rewards are objectively larger and more meaningful. $1 today feels subjectively more valuable than $5 next year. A comfortable hour now feels subjectively more appealing than a much better future hour earned through present discomfort. This bias made excellent sense in the environment humans evolved in. Immediate rewards were certain. Future rewards were deeply uncertain. Discounting the future was rational caution in a world where the future was genuinely unreliable. In the modern world, particularly for anyone pursuing long-term growth, creative work, relationship depth, or meaningful contribution, this bias works against you. The compound returns of consistent investment in skill, health, relationships, and knowledge only materialize over long time horizons. The person who cannot make peace with delayed return cannot access compound returns. The first pillar of long-game thinking is a clear and emotionally alive vision of the future you are building. Not a vague aspiration. A specific, detailed, viscerally felt picture of the life and work and person you are working toward. What does it look like in concrete terms? What kind of work are you doing? What relationships surround you? What kind of person are you in that picture? How do you feel in an ordinary morning in that life? Vision matters for a specific psychological reason. It provides the emotional fuel that sustains effort through the inevitable periods of difficulty, slow progress, and uncertain return. Without a compelling vision, every difficult period is simply suffering. With a compelling vision, the same difficult period is recognizable as part of a story worth telling. The suffering has context, and suffering with context is immeasurably more navigable than suffering without it. Research on future self-continuity shows that the vividness of your mental model of your future self directly predicts your willingness to make decisions that serve that future self. When the future self is vague and abstract, present self-comfort wins almost every time. When the future self is specific, familiar, and emotionally real, decisions in their favor become easier. This is why writing about, drawing, or carefully imagining your desired future is not a soft exercise in wishful thinking. It is a psychological tool that strengthens the neural representation of the future self, making long-term thinking emotionally accessible rather than intellectually acknowledged but behaviorally ignored. The second pillar of long-game thinking is principle-based decision-making. Having a clear, internalized set of guiding principles that define how you navigate the most important categories of decision in your life. These are not external rules. They are distillations of your own deepest commitments and values. They emerge from the serious questions that most people avoid. What do I actually care about, beneath the surface preferences and social pressures? What would I regret not honoring at the end of my life? What kind of person do I want to have been when this chapter is over? When you have genuine answers to those questions, crystallized into clear principles, the individual decisions become dramatically easier. You do not have to reason from scratch each time a difficult choice arrives. You already know what someone with your values does in this situation. The principle carries the decision. This is not rigidity. It is integrity in the literal sense, the state of being integrated, of having your daily actions and your deepest values pointing in the same direction. The third pillar is what researchers studying sustained high performance call strategic patience. The ability to sustain effort through the periods when progress is not yet visible and results have not yet materialized. Almost every significant achievement has an extended period between when meaningful effort is being invested and when meaningful results are visible. This gap is where most people give up. They interpret the absence of immediate results as evidence that the approach is not working, or that they lack the required ability, or that the goal was unrealistic. Strategic patience is the capacity to continue investing in the period before the results arrive, based on a clear understanding of why the approach is sound and what the appropriate time horizon for evaluation is. This requires intellectual honesty about realistic timelines, knowledge of the mechanism through which your effort produces results, and enough identity investment in the process itself, not just the outcome, to remain engaged before the outcome materializes. The fourth pillar is what we might call sustainable intensity, the ability to push hard without burning out, to be genuinely committed without being chronically exhausted, to bring real effort to each day without depleting the reserves required to bring real effort to the next year. Sustainable intensity looks different from the grinding, sleep-deprived, recovery-free model of ambition that many high-achievement cultures celebrate. It involves taking recovery as seriously as effort, designing work cycles with genuine restoration built in, protecting the sources of renewal, whether physical, social, creative, or spiritual, that make the intensity of the next work period possible. People who build extraordinary things over long careers are almost never the ones who burned most intensely for a few years and then collapsed. They are the ones who learned to sustain themselves, who treated their energy as a resource to be carefully managed across decades, not a resource to be spent as quickly as possible. The long game, ultimately, is about meaning. It is about understanding what you are building and why it matters, deeply enough that the present difficulty is contextualized within a larger story that you believe in. Every day is simultaneously a complete unit of living and a building block in something larger. The long game mentality holds both of these truths simultaneously, without collapsing one into the other. Today matters fully, and today is also part of something that will only reveal its full shape much further down the road. That dual awareness of present fullness and future direction is the orientation of people who do extraordinary things over a lifetime, and it is available to anyone willing to develop it. We began this journey with a person sitting at a desk, stuck, intelligent, capable, genuinely motivated, and somehow unable to consistently access what they had. That person may have been you, and I hope that over the course of these chapters, something has genuinely shifted, not just in the information you hold, but in the way you understand yourself and the way you understand what is actually possible. You now understand that attention is a biological resource with real limits, and that managing it deliberately, rather than letting it be captured by whoever is loudest, is the single most foundational act of high performance. You understand that pressure is not the enemy, that the physiological mobilization you feel before things that matter is your system preparing you, and that reappraising that activation, rather than suppressing it, unlocks a quality of performance that fighting your own nervous system never could. You understand that recovery is not the absence of ambition, that genuine restoration of sleep, of attention, of emotional regulation is the precondition for sustained high-quality work, and that the culture that celebrates relentless effort without recovery is not producing excellence. It is producing burnout followed by regret. You understand that failure is not a verdict, that your relationship with failure determines almost everything about your long-term trajectory, and that the deliberate practice of mining failures for precise, forward-facing information transforms them from painful endpoints into necessary turning points. You understand that identity is architecture, that the stories you hold about who you are shape your behavior at a level far deeper than motivation or willpower, and that identity is not fixed. That every day you cast votes for the person you are becoming, and those votes accumulate into a self. You understand cognitive load, the invisible tax that unfinished tasks, excessive decisions, and ambient worry impose on your performance. And you have the tools to manage it through external capture, decision reduction, completion cycles, and deliberate solitude. You understand that flow is not luck, that it is a neurological state accessible through specific, learnable conditions, and that engineering those conditions deliberately, clear goals, immediate feedback, challenge skill balance, complete concentration, intrinsic engagement, is a genuine skill that compounds over time. You understand that confidence is built, not inherited, that it follows competence rather than preceding it, and that the path to it runs through deliberate exposure, genuine skill building, and the accumulation of evidence that you can handle what you are attempting. You understand the narrator in your head, that the voice is not always right, that you can change your relationship to your own thoughts, learning to observe them without being captured by them, and that this skill of cognitive diffusion and intentional redirection is among the most powerful performance tools available. You understand cognitive flexibility, that the ability to think in multiple frames, update your beliefs, and hold ambiguity without collapse is a learnable capacity, and that in a world defined by change, it may be the most valuable cognitive skill you can develop. You understand environmental design, that willpower is finite and expensive, while environment is reliable and cheap. That structuring your surroundings, digital and physical, social and temporal, to serve your goals is smarter and more sustainable than fighting your context every day. And you understand the long game, that meaning sustains performance across a lifetime in a way that external pressure never does. That the willingness to invest in the present for a future you can clearly envision is the orientation that separates people who build something worth looking back on from those who had impressive moments without a coherent arc. None of this requires extraordinary talent. None of it requires a perfect personality. None of it is available only to some people and not others. It requires practice, consistency, the willingness to treat your mind as the most sophisticated and important tool you will ever own, and to invest in understanding and optimizing it with the seriousness that investment deserves. The world occasionally rewards busy people, It consistently rewards people with sharpened minds. Now you know what a sharpened mind actually requires. Here is what I want you to carry forward from this. You were not given a defective mind. The most complex information processing system in the known universe is already inside your skull. The capacity for focus, resilience, creativity, growth, and meaningful contribution is already there. What most people lack is not the capacity. It is the understanding of how to work with it rather than against it. Most people navigate their entire lives, with all their ambitions and relationships and challenges and dreams, using their most important tool without ever having been properly introduced to it, without understanding how it fatigues and how it restores, how it learns and how it gets in its own way, how it builds confidence and how it undermines it, how it creates identity and how identity shapes every subsequent choice. You have taken a step toward a different relationship with your own mind. And the real knowledge does not come from listening or reading alone. It comes from application, from taking what landed intellectually and testing it against the actual texture of your life, from noticing what works, adjusting what is not, staying honestly curious about your own functioning. You are the most interesting project you will ever work on. And unlike most projects, you get feedback in real time. Every day is both an experiment and a data point. Every choice you make tells you something about who you currently are. And every deliberate choice, made with awareness of who you are building toward, moves the story one step forward. Go build something worth building. Become someone worth becoming. Not through force or grinding willpower, but through the quiet, consistent, intelligent, self-compassionate practice of working with your mind instead of against it. You already have what you need. The question is always the same. What will you do with it?